My name is Chloe Anderson. I'm 28 years old. And for most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I gave enough, my family would eventually see me. I was wrong. The moment I realized that wasn't at the end of a 16-hour shift in the ICU, or when I was studying for my nursing boards until my eyes blurred. It was at a restaurant, surrounded by the clinking of glasses and the smell of roasted garlic. A place that was supposed to be about celebrating family. My sister Sophie was the center of attention as always. Her laughter was loud and bright, drawing everyone's eyes. My parents beamed at her, hanging on her every word. I sat beside them, a ghost at the feast. My presence as functional and overlooked as the fork in my hand. Then my mother, in a moment of casual cruelty that she had perfected over the years, turned to me. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know, Chloe," she said, her voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "We are so proud of Sophie. She's really making something of herself." She paused, looked me up and down, and delivered the line she'd been practicing in 1,000 different ways since I was a child. "You'll never be as good as your sister." My dad nodded slowly. A silent, solid confirmation. Sophie just smirked. A tiny, triumphant curl of her lips. A familiar coldness washed over me. The feeling of being erased, of my entire life's work, my sacrifices, my very essence being weighed, measured, and dismissed in a single sentence. But this time, something was different. The coldness didn't freeze me. It hardened me. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed words and buried pain, finally solidified into something solid, something strong. I felt a strange calm settle over me. I placed my fork down, the quiet click against the porcelain plate cutting through the silence that had fallen. I looked my mother in the eye, then my father, then my sister, and then I decided to tell them the truth. The one secret that held their perfect little world together. The one that once spoken would burn it all to the ground. To understand that night, you have to understand all the years that came before it. My life has always been a study in contrast to my sister's. It felt like we were born into different families that just happened to share a house. Sophie was the art project, the one to be decorated, displayed, and admired. I was the foundation, the load-bearing wall, essential, but invisible and expected to hold everything up without complaint. My world was the sterile, beeping environment of the ICU. My days and often my nights were a blur of 12 to 16-hour shifts. I lived my life under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, my ears tuned to the rhythmic pulse of heart monitors. I was fluent in the language of vital signs, IV drips, and medical emergencies. I've held the hands of strangers as they took their last breath and felt the desperate grip of family members praying for a miracle. I've cleaned wounds, administered life-saving drugs, and performed CPR until my arms screamed and my scrubs were soaked with sweat. There is a weight to that kind of work, a heaviness that settles deep in your bones. You see the fragility of life up close, and it changes you. You learn to be resilient, responsible, and unflinchingly practical. You have to be. People's lives depend on it. When I wasn't at the hospital, I was working. My second job was online tutoring, helping high school kids untangle the complexities of biology and chemistry. I'd finish a brutal shift, my body aching and my mind numb with exhaustion, and drive home to my small, sparsely furnished apartment. I'd make a quick dinner, usually something from a box or a can, and then log on for another 3 hours, patiently explaining cellular respiration or the periodic table to a teenager who would rather be anywhere else. That extra money wasn't for fun. It was for my student loans. The mountain of debt I had taken on to become a nurse because my parents had made it clear that my education was my own responsibility. It builds character, Chloe, my father used to say. A phrase that I later realized was code for, "We're saving our money for Sophie." My life was a carefully constructed budget of time and money. My clothes came from thrift stores. My car was a 10-year-old sedan with a growing collection of strange noises. Vacations were a foreign concept, something I saw on other people's social media feeds. My primary focus was simple: work, pay my bills, and try to get enough sleep to do it all over again the next day. I didn't see it as a tragedy. I saw it as a necessity. It was the life I had to build for myself because no one else was going to build it for me. Meanwhile, Sophie lived in a different universe. Her life was a highlight reel curated and funded by our parents. While I was applying for financial aid, they were co-signing a loan for her brand new convertible as a high school graduation present. While I was working weekends at a campus coffee shop to pay for my textbooks, they were paying for her to study abroad in Spain for a semester. Her communications degree from a private university that cost 3 times as much as my state nursing school was covered in full. Every milestone in her life was a grand production. Her 21st birthday was a catered party in our parents' backyard with a DJ and dozens of guests. Mine was a quiet dinner with a friend from work because my parents were in Napa celebrating their anniversary. A trip that just happened to coincide with my birthday week. Sophie's graduation was a huge family affair, with relatives flying in from across the country. For my graduation from nursing school, my parents sent a text message, "Congrats. Honey. So proud." We couldn't get away. Sophie has a big presentation at her internship we have to help her with. The praise was as unequally distributed as the money. Sophie was creative, a people person, destined for great things. Her marketing internship, which my dad had secured through a friend, was spoken of as if she were on the fast track to becoming a CEO. They would gush about a slogan she came up with or a presentation she gave. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one, the practical one. My accomplishments were met with a nod and a quick change of subject. Once I came home after a particularly harrowing shift, where I had been the first to notice a patient going into septic shock, and my quick action had saved his life. I was buzzing with adrenaline and a quiet sense of pride. I tried to tell my mom about it. "That's nice, dear," she said, her eyes glued to her phone. "Did you see the new handbag Sophie got? It's a Michael Kors. She has such good taste." I felt myself shrink. It was like I was speaking a language they couldn't or wouldn't understand. The world I lived in, a world of life and death, of science and compassion, was of no interest to them. It didn't have the glamour of Sophie's life. It wasn't as easy to brag about at dinner parties. So, they didn't. I became the background character in my own family's story. I was the reliable daughter, the one who never asked for anything, the one who was always working. They saw my independence not as a strength I had been forced to develop, but as a sign that I didn't need them. And if I didn't need them, they didn't need to invest in me. They didn't need to celebrate me. They didn't even, as I would soon learn, need to include me. I told myself for years that it didn't matter. I told myself that my work was its own reward, that their approval was a shallow thing I didn't need. But late at night in the quiet of my apartment, after a long day of giving everything I had to others, the loneliness would creep in. It was a deep, aching void. The simple human need to be seen, to be valued by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, is a powerful thing. And its absence was a constant, dull pain in my heart. I was the family's foundation, and I was cracking under the weight of their neglect. The slow, steady erosion of my spirit became a landslide on a Tuesday night. I was on my 30-minute dinner break, huddled in the corner of the hospital's bleak cafeteria. It was the only downtime I'd get in a 14-hour shift, a brief moment to refuel and disconnect. Like most people, I scrolled through my phone looking for a mindless escape. That's when I saw it. The first picture was of my sister, Sophie. She was standing on a black sand beach, a vibrant pink hibiscus tucked behind her ear, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. She was laughing, her head thrown back in pure, unadulterated joy. The caption read, "Living on island time." My heart gave a strange little jolt. Sophie's on vacation, I thought. Good for her. Then I swiped. The next photo stopped my breath. It was a group shot. Sophie, my mother, and my father, all standing together, arms slung around each other's shoulders. They were tanned, glowing with happiness, and holding cocktails in hollowed-out pineapples. Behind them, the turquoise water of the Pacific Ocean stretched to the horizon. The location tag was simple and brutal: Maui, Hawaii. I stared at the screen, my lukewarm soup forgotten. My entire family was in Hawaii together. The caption written by my mother was a stab to the gut. Nothing better than family time in paradise. Soaking up every moment. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. When did they plan this? Why didn't they say anything? A frantic search of their social media pages revealed the truth. They had been there for 4 days already. There were pictures of them at a luau, on a snorkeling trip, hiking to a waterfall, an entire family vacation planned, booked, and executed in complete secrecy. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to put my phone face down on the table. It wasn't just that I wasn't invited. It was the calculated deception. They had deliberately hidden it from me. The silence from them over the past few days suddenly made sense. The short, vague texts from my mom. The unanswered calls to my dad. I had chalked it up to them being busy, The reality was so much worse. They weren't busy. They were actively excluding me. My break ended and I had to push the feeling down, compartmentalize the hurt, and walk back into the ICU. I had patients who needed me, lives that depended on my focus. But for the rest of my shift, the image of them smiling on that beach was burned into my mind. Every beep of a monitor, every call light felt like a reminder of my isolation. I was here under these sterile lights, saving lives while my family was in paradise, creating memories without me, as if I didn't exist. When I finally got home after midnight, exhausted and emotionally raw, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I called my mom. She answered on the third ring, her voice breezy and distant. I could hear the faint sound of waves crashing in the background. "Chloe." "Hi." "Honey, is everything okay?" she asked. A slight note of annoyance in her voice, as if my call were an interruption. My own voice trembled no matter how hard I tried to keep it steady. "I saw the pictures," I said, the words feeling small and pathetic. "You're in Hawaii." There was a brief pause. "Oh, that," she said, her tone dismissive. Yes. It was a very last-minute thing. Sophie's boss gave her some bonus vacation days, and we just decided to go for it. "You didn't think to tell me?" I asked, the hurt making my throat tight. "You didn't think to even ask if I could come?" Her sigh was heavy, impatient. "Oh, Chloe, don't be so dramatic. We didn't think you could get time off work. You're always so busy." It was the same old excuse, the one they always used. My responsibility, my work ethic, was twisted into a convenient reason to leave me behind. They didn't see it as a sacrifice. They saw it as a cage of my own making. "You could have asked." "Mom," I whispered. "I could have tried. I have vacation days, too." "Well, it's too late now," she said briskly. "We're coming home in a few days. We'll do something with you then. We'll go out to dinner. A peace offering. A token dinner to make up for being erased from one of the biggest family events of the year." I felt a bitter, hollow laugh bubble up inside me, but I choked it back down. The conversation was over. She had already justified it in her mind. My feelings were an inconvenience. I was about to hang up to retreat and lick my wounds in private when my phone buzzed with a text notification. It was from Sophie. I opened it and the final, cruelest blow landed. "Heard you called Mom," the text read. "Don't be mad. You're always working anyway. Someone's gotta pay the bills." Lol. The casual cruelty of it. The winking emoji. The lol. It was all designed to mock me, to rub my face in the fact that my hard work was what enabled their fun. I was the workhorse, pulling the cart so they could enjoy the ride. And they weren't even grateful. They were smug. I sank onto my couch, the phone slipping from my hand. The feeling wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a profound, gut-wrenching betrayal. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had used me, discarded me, and then laughed about it. I was a utility, not a daughter, not a sister. My purpose in the family was to be the responsible one, the one who stayed behind, the one who paid the bills. And in that moment, I felt utterly and completely alone. The foundation I had been holding up for so long hadn't just cracked. It had shattered. A few months after the Hawaii incident, things settled into a familiar, frosty pattern. My parents and Sophie acted as if nothing had happened. They offered a few half-hearted apologies that sounded more like justifications. And I, out of a deeply ingrained habit of keeping the peace, accepted them. I didn't forgive, and I certainly didn't forget. But I let it go. Arguing felt pointless. It would only end with me being labeled as too sensitive or ungrateful. So, I retreated further into my work, building my walls a little higher. Then came the invitation for Sophie's 26th birthday dinner. It was to be held at Vetrina, one of the most exclusive and expensive Italian restaurants in the city. The kind of place with white tablecloths, a sommelier, and price tags that made my eyes water. It was so quintessentially Sophie. All style and performance. My first instinct was to say no, to claim I had to work, which was always a believable excuse. But my mother was insistent. You have to be there. Chloe, she'd said on the phone. Her voice laced with that specific tone that meant any answer other than yes would trigger a week-long guilt trip. It's for your sister. We need to present a united front as a family. A united front. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. But I agreed. I told myself it was just one dinner. I could survive a few hours of being invisible. I bought a simple, modest navy blue dress from a department store. The most expensive piece of clothing I'd purchased in years, and still felt underdressed the moment I walked in. The restaurant was stunning, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. A private room had been booked, and it was already filled with Sophie's friends. A vibrant, laughing crowd of marketing executives and aspiring influencers, all dressed in the latest fashions. My parents were holding court, my dad pouring champagne, my mom beaming as if she were the mother of a Nobel laureate. Sophie was the star of the show. Of course. She wore a glittering gold dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And she moved through the room with an effortless grace, accepting compliments and gifts. She gave me a brief, airy hug when I arrived. Chloe, you made it. I wasn't sure you would. The subtext was clear. I'm surprised you could tear yourself away from your dreary little life. I found a seat at the far end of the long table, hoping to fade into the background. For a while, it worked. The conversation flowed around me, a torrent of talk about brand collaborations, upcoming music festivals, and corporate retreats in the Caribbean. I had nothing to contribute. My world of medical charts and sterile gowns felt a million miles away. Then, my father stood up, tapping his champagne flute with a spoon. A hush fell over the room. I'd just like to say a few words about my incredible daughter. Sophie, he began. his voice thick with emotion. He launched into a 5-minute monologue that was a masterclass in parental favoritism. He praised her vision, her drive, her unflinching ambition. He told an anecdote about how she had redesigned a marketing campaign at her firm, claiming her boss had called her a prodigy. We always knew she was destined for greatness, he concluded, raising his glass. She is without a doubt the successful daughter, the one who makes us proud every single day. To Sophie, the room erupted in applause. To Sophie, everyone echoed. I raised my glass, my hand feeling heavy. A forced smile plastered on my face. My mother was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Overcome with pride, I felt a familiar pang, the dull ache of being the other one, the one who didn't inspire speeches. Dinner was served, a multi-course affair of exquisite food that I could barely taste. The knot in my stomach was too tight. I was trying to make it through the final stretch when a well-meaning guest, one of my parents' business acquaintances, turned to me. Her name was Susan. And Chloe, she said with a kind smile. Your parents are always talking about Sophie, but we hear so little about you. What is it you do again? It was a simple, polite question. For a split second, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was a chance to be seen. I could tell her about my work, about the challenges and rewards of being an ICU nurse. I opened my mouth to answer, to say, I'm a registered nurse in the intensive care unit at City General. But before I could get a single word out, my father cut in with a loud, dismissive laugh. He leaned across the table, his voice booming so everyone could hear. Oh, Chloe's our little workhorse, he announced as if sharing a charming family joke. She's still figuring things out over at the hospital. A noble profession. Of course. But she's on her own path. He winked at Susan. Not everyone can be a superstar like Sophie. The table rippled with polite, uncomfortable laughter. Susan gave me a pitying look. Sophie shot me that same tiny, triumphant smirk from across the table. And in that moment, my entire world tilted. Still figuring things out. The words echoed in my head. Each one a separate, stinging blow. All those nights spent studying until dawn. All the life or death decisions made in a split second. The hands I'd held. The families I'd counseled. The lives I had fought for with every ounce of my being. All of it. My entire career. My identity. Reduced to a condescending punchline. It wasn't just that they didn't praise me. It was that they actively diminished me. They minimized my life's work to make Sophie's shine brighter. I looked at my father, who had already turned his attention back to the center of the table, completely oblivious to the wound he had just inflicted. I looked at my mother, who was smiling, nodding in agreement. And I looked at Sophie, who was basking in the glow of their adoration, an adoration I had helped pay for. The hurt was so sharp, so intense. It felt like a physical pain. This wasn't just being overlooked anymore. This was public humiliation. This was them telling the world that I was a disappointment, a failure, And for the first time, the deep, abiding sadness I had carried for years began to curdle into something else. Something hot and sharp and dangerous. It was rage. And I realized, sitting there in my cheap dress amidst their expensive celebration, that I was done. I was done being their footnote. I was done being their joke. I just didn't know yet how I was going to end it. The weeks following Sophie's birthday were a quiet torment. The humiliation from that night played on a loop in my mind, each replay sharpening my anger. I pulled back from my family completely, using my demanding work schedule as the perfect shield. I ignored my mother's calls, gave one-word answers to her texts, and felt a growing resolve to untangle myself from their lives. The problem was, I didn't know how deeply entangled I truly was. The revelation came on a Sunday afternoon. My mother called me in a manufactured panic. "Chloe, thank goodness you answered. The bank sent some letters and your father is out of town. It's all so confusing. Something about our mortgage. You're so good with this stuff. Could you please come over and help me sort it out?" Her voice was laced with a helpless, damsel in distress tone that I knew was reserved for when she wanted something. For years, my role as the responsible one extended to being the family's unpaid financial consultant. I had helped them with their taxes, explained insurance policies, and set up their online banking. My stomach twisted with reluctance. I wanted to say no, but the word mortgage snagged my attention. For the past 2 years, I had been contributing to that mortgage. It was a deal we had struck after my dad's business had a few rough years. They hadn't asked Sophie for help. They had come to me. "It's just temporary, Chloe," my dad had said, his voice grave. "Just until things pick up again. We don't want to lose the house. You're the only one we can count on." They had played on my sense of duty, my fear for their stability, and I had agreed. Every month, without fail, I transferred $2,800 from my account to theirs. It was a huge chunk of my income. The reason I worked a second job. The reason I still had my own student loans hanging over my head. But it was for the family home, the house I grew up in. I told myself it was the right thing to do. So, I went. I found my mom at the kitchen table, a chaotic mess of envelopes and papers spread before her. She fluttered her hands helplessly. "I just don't understand any of it," she sighed. "It's okay, Mom. I'll figure it out," I said, my voice more tired than reassuring. I started sorting the papers into piles. Bank statements, utility bills, credit card offers. The mortgage letter that had prompted the call was just a standard annual statement. Nothing to be alarmed about. I explained it to her and she nodded vaguely, her attention already drifting. But as I continued to organize the pile, my own curiosity got the better of me. I had been blindly sending them money for 2 years, trusting it was going where they said it was. For the first time, I decided to verify. I started with their main checking account statement. I saw my transfer from the first of the month. Deposit from Chloe Anderson. $2,800. I scanned down the list of withdrawals looking for the corresponding mortgage payment. I found it. But the amount was only $1,950. That was strange. A difference of $850. Where was the rest going? My eyes continued to scan the page. And then I saw it. A line item from the 3rd of the month. 2 days after my deposit. A payment of $572.34 made to Sally Mae. I froze. Sally Mae was a student loan servicer. I knew for a fact my parents had paid off their own school debt decades ago. The only person with student loans was Sophie. But they had paid for her college. Hadn't they? A cold dread crept up my spine. I shuffled through the papers on the table, my movements becoming more frantic. My mom watched me, a flicker of nervousness in her eyes. "What are you looking for?" "Dear?" I didn't answer. My hands found another envelope. This one from a car financing company. It was a payment booklet in Sophie's name for her convertible. Tucked inside was a receipt for last month's payment. The money had come from my parents' account. The payment was $450. The numbers started flashing in my mind. $572 for the loan. $450 for the car. That was over $1,000. My $2,800 contribution wasn't just helping with the mortgage. It was a slush fund. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I dug deeper, pulling out more statements, my hands shaking slightly. It was worse than I could have imagined. There were payments to Sophie's credit cards, Nordstrom, Sephora, Bloomingdale's. There was a Venmo transfer to her roommate for her share of the rent, labeled "From Mom and Dad." There were even ATM withdrawals from a bank near her apartment. The full picture began to emerge, stark and hideous. They hadn't just been supplementing Sophie's lifestyle. They had been funding it entirely. Her car, her rent, her shopping habits, and even the student loans I never knew she had. It was all being paid for out of my parents' account. An account that was being propped up by my money. The money I earned during grueling shifts surrounded by sickness and death. The money I was supposed to be using to build my own life. I finally found the document that broke me. It was a loan statement from Sophie's university. Apparently, my parents hadn't paid for her entire tuition as they'd claimed. They had paid for the first 2 years, and she had taken out loans for the last 2. The total amount was just over $45,000, and sitting right next to it was a letter from the loan company confirming that the balance had been paid in full 2 weeks ago. The payment had been made from my parents' savings account, an account I knew for a fact had been nearly empty before I had started sending them money. My $2,800 a month for 24 months had not been saving the family home. It had been paying off Sophie's debt. It had been buying her designer clothes and financing her weekend trips. My sacrifice had been a lie. It was a secret. Systematic transfer of my hard-earned wealth to my golden child sister. I looked up from the papers, my vision blurry. My mother was watching me, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin, guilty line. She knew what I had found. She knew what she had been doing. "Mom," I whispered, my voice raw. "What is this?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just picked up a stray napkin and started folding it into a tiny, Perfect square. Your sister? She needed a little help getting started. She mumbled. It was just to give her a leg up. A leg up. They had called me a failure at her birthday dinner. Humiliated me in front of a room full of people. All while I was unknowingly paying for the very life they were celebrating. The betrayal was so profound, so monstrous. It stole the air from my lungs. I felt like a fool. A blind, trusting fool who had been systematically robbed by her own family. I left my parents' house in a daze, the incriminating papers clutched in my hand. I drove aimlessly for an hour, the cityscape blurring past my windows, my mind a maelstrom of shock and fury. The deception was so deep, so calculated. It was hard to process. Every memory of the past 2 years was now tainted. Every time my mom had complained about money, every time my dad had thanked me for being so dependable, it was all part of a monstrous lie. The next day at the hospital, I was a ghost. I went through the motions of my job. My movements automatic. My mind a million miles away. My colleagues noticed something was wrong. I was usually engaged, focused, a steady presence in the chaos of the ICU. Now, I was silent and withdrawn. During a rare moment of quiet on the night shift, my friend Olivia, another nurse who had seen me through countless crises, cornered me in the break room. Okay, Chloe. What is it? She asked, her expression full of concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The words spilled out of me in a torrent. The Hawaii trip, the birthday dinner, and finally the discovery in the bank statements. I laid the papers I'd brought with me on the small table between us. The stark black and white of the numbers telling their own ugly story. Olivia listened patiently, her eyes widening as the scale of the deception became clear. She picked up one of the statements, her brow furrowed in disbelief. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her expression hardening from concern into pure, unadulterated anger on my behalf. Chloe, she said, her voice low and firm. This is not them helping Sophie out. This is financial abuse. Do you understand that? They are systematically stealing from you to fund her life. And to make it worse, they are emotionally abusing you at the same time. They're calling you a failure while you're literally paying for your sister's life. This is sick. Hearing her say it out loud so bluntly shattered the last of my own denial. It wasn't a family helping each other. It was a parasitic relationship. And I was the host. I need to know how much, I whispered. More to myself than to her. Olivia pushed a notepad and pen across the table. Then do the math. See it for what it is. With a shaking hand, I started writing. $2,800 multiplied by 24 months. The number came out to $67,200. I stared at it, the figure seeming impossibly large. That was more than I made in a year at my first nursing job. It was a down payment on a house. It was the complete erasure of my own student debt. It was a future they had stolen from me and handed to my sister. And that wasn't even all of it. I remembered all the little extras. The frantic calls from my mom. Chloe? The water heater broke. Can you send an extra $500? Or, your father's car needs new tires. We're a little short this month. I had always sent the money without question. Now, I saw those requests in a new, sickening light. Were any of them real? Or were they just another way to fund Sophie's lifestyle? I estimated at least another $5,000 in those emergency transfers. The grand total was over $70,000. I felt like I was going to be sick. All my sacrifice, all those extra shifts, all the nights I spent tutoring instead of resting. It was all for this. To enable my sister to live a life I could only dream of while our parents called her a success and me a disappointment. The injustice of it was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The final straw, the one that broke the camel's back, came 2 days later. My phone rang, and it was my mother. Her voice was chipper, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. Hi. Honey, I was just talking to Sophie about her wedding plans. She chirped. The wedding was still a year away, but it had already become the family's sole focus. She and her fiancé found the most wonderful caterer. But oh, they are so expensive. Your father and I were thinking, since you're doing so well and you don't have as many expenses as your sister, maybe you could take care of it as your wedding gift to her? It would mean so much. I was silent. The sheer, unmitigated gall of her request was breathtaking. After discovering they had funneled over $70,000 of my money to Sophie, they were now asking for more. Not for an emergency. Not for a necessity. But for fancy food at a party celebrating the person whose life I had been unknowingly bankrolling. They saw me as nothing more than a walking, talking ATM. An endless resource to be tapped for their golden child's benefit. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The years of sadness, of feeling overlooked and unloved, finally burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard rage. The victim was gone. The doormat was gone. All that was left was a woman who had been pushed too far. I'll have to think about it. Mom, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I'll call you back. I hung up the phone before she could reply. I didn't need to think about it. I already knew what I was going to do. The abuse was going to stop. The lies were going to end. And I was going to be the one to end them. They thought I was a failure. They were about to find out how resourceful a failure could be. The decision, once made, was surprisingly easy to act upon. The anger had clarified everything, burning away the fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded my judgment for years. My first move was quiet, simple, and executed with a few clicks of a mouse. I logged into my online banking portal, went to the transfers section, and found the recurring monthly payment of $2,800 to my parents' account. I clicked Edit, and then I clicked Delete. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to delete this scheduled transfer? I stared at the words for a moment. A flicker of the old fear, the old conditioning rising up. What will they do? How will they react? But then I pictured Sophie's smug face at her birthday dinner, and I pictured the bank statements laid out on the break room table. I clicked confirm. It was done. The financial pipeline that had been draining my life away was officially closed. The feeling wasn't just relief. It was a jolt of pure, unadulterated power. For the first few days of the month, there was silence. This was expected. My transfer always went through on the 1st, but the mortgage wasn't officially late until the 15th. On the 5th, I got a casual text from my mom. "Hey, honey. Just checking in. Hope you're having a good week." I knew what it was. A gentle probe. I replied with a simple, "You, too." The 8th of the month brought a more direct inquiry. Another text from Mom. "Hi, Chloe. I didn't see the mortgage help come through yet. Did you forget?" I let the message sit for a few hours before replying. "Things have been hectic at work. I'll look at it when I get a chance." The calculated vagueness was a new tool for me, and I found I was surprisingly good at it. By the 16th, the panic began. My phone rang and it was my father. His voice, usually so confident and booming, was tight with anxiety. "Chloe, the bank called. The mortgage payment is late. They're charging us a late fee." "What happened? Did your payment not go through?" "Oh, that's strange," I said, my voice a carefully crafted symphony of mild surprise. I must have forgotten to set it up again after my bank updated their app. "Sorry about that." "Forget?" he sputtered. "Chloe, this is serious. You need to fix this right now. Go to the bank and wire the money immediately. And send extra for the late fee you caused." There it was. Not a hint of concern for me. Not a question of whether I was okay. Just a demand. An order. And the blame, of course, was all mine. The rage which had been simmering began to boil. "You know, Dad," I said, my voice still deceptively calm. "I've been thinking a lot about finances lately. I think it's time we all sat down and had a real conversation about the family budget. All of us. You, Mom, me, and Sophie." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I had never initiated a family meeting in my life. I was the one who took orders, not the one who called summits. "What's there to talk about?" he grumbled. Suspicious. "The arrangement is simple. You help us out. We keep the house. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page," I said smoothly. "How about dinner? Friday night? My treat. We can go to that little bistro you and Mom like." This seemed to placate him slightly. The offer to pay was a familiar gesture, one that put me back in my designated role as the family provider. He saw it as a sign of my return to compliance. He thought this dinner would be about them lecturing me, guilting me back into line. He had no idea what it was really about. "Fine," he conceded. "Friday at 7, but you need to handle the mortgage payment before then." "Chloe, don't be irresponsible." "I'll handle it," I said, and ended the call. Of course, I had no intention of sending them a single cent. The late fees were their problem now. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I felt like a lawyer building a case. I went to a copy shop and made duplicates of every incriminating document, the bank statements with my transfers highlighted, the corresponding payments to Sophie's loans and credit cards, the car payment receipts, the loan payoff confirmation letter. I organized them chronologically in a thick black binder. Each page was a piece of evidence, a testament to their lies and my silence. This folder was my voice. It was my armor. As I worked, I felt a transformation happening within me. The scared, overlooked daughter was being replaced by someone I barely recognized. A woman who was calm, methodical, and filled with a cold, clear purpose. They had underestimated me my entire life. They saw me as the soft-hearted, dutiful nurse who would just keep giving, no matter what. They had no idea that the same skills that made me a good nurse, attention to detail, the ability to stay calm under pressure, and the stomach to deal with messy situation also made me a formidable opponent. They were walking into a trap, and they didn't even know it. They expected to find the same old Chloe at that dinner table, the one who would apologize and promise to do better. They were about to meet the new one, and she had receipts. The bistro was a cozy, unassuming place. The kind of restaurant my parents favored because it looked traditional and felt safe. Soft jazz played in the background, and the air smelled of bread and simmering sauces. When I arrived, they were already there, seated at a corner booth. My father, my mother, and Sophie. A united front, just as my mother had always wanted. Their expressions were a mixture of stern disappointment and impatience, the faces of judges about to deliver a verdict to a wayward child. I slid into the booth opposite them, placing my large handbag on the seat beside me. Inside, the thick binder felt as heavy as a brick. "Chloe, you're late," my father said, foregoing any greeting. "Sorry. Traffic was bad," I replied evenly, not rising to the bait. My mother immediately launched into the attack. "Your father told me about your low lapse. I have to say, Chloe, we are very disappointed in you. After all we've done for you, to be so careless with the family home." She trailed off, shaking her head in theatrical dismay. Sophie, for her part, just sipped her water, a smug little smile playing on her lips. She was here as a spectator to watch the black sheep be put back in her pen. I let them talk. I let them lecture me about responsibility, about family duty, about the stress they were under. I listened as they painted themselves as the victims of my thoughtlessness. It was a well-rehearsed performance, and I gave them the space to deliver it in its entirety. I needed them to feel completely in control, completely justified in their anger. Finally, after the waiter had taken our orders and my father had finished his rant about late fees and credit scores, my mother delivered the finishing blow. She leaned forward, her eyes cold and hard, and repeated the line that had become the anthem of my life. "Honestly, Chloe," she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain, "we are so proud of Sophie. She's responsible. She's successful. You should try to be more like her. But I suppose you'll never be as good as your sister. That was it. My cue. The strange, icy calm I had been cultivating for days settled over me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply looked her straight in the eye. Then maybe you should ask her to pay your bills, I said. The words hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. The three of them stared at me, their expressions shifting from condescension to confusion. What did you just say? My father demanded. I didn't answer him. Instead, I reached into my handbag and pulled out the black binder. I placed it on the table with a solid, definitive thud that made the water glasses jump. I opened it to the first page. I'd like to go over some finances, I announced to the table, my voice as steady and professional as if I were giving a patient report. Let's start 2 years ago. I turned the binder around so they could see. The first page was a copy of my bank statement, the first $2,800 transfer I ever made to them, clearly highlighted in yellow. This is the money I sent you on the first of every month, which you told me was to save the family home from foreclosure, I explained. I flipped the page. And this is your bank statement from 2 days later. It shows a payment of $572 to Sally Mae. For Sophie's student loans, the ones you told me you had paid for. Sophie's smirk vanished. Her face went pale. I continued flipping through the pages. A relentless, methodical presentation of their betrayal. And here is the $450 payment for Sophie's car. And here are the transfers for her rent and her credit card bills. With each page, the color drained from my parents' faces. My father's blustering anger deflated into stunned silence. My mother's hands began to tremble. I've done the math, I said, my voice unwavering. Over the past 2 years, I have given you $67,200 of that money. Less than half actually went to the mortgage. The rest, nearly $40,000, went directly to funding Sophie's life, her car, her clothes, to her apartment, and to paying off the $45,000 student loan you lied to me about. I finally closed the binder. The silence in our little booth was absolute. The sounds of the restaurant around us, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of other conversations, seemed a world away. So, you're right, Mom, I said, my voice softening just a little. Not with pity, but with a profound, final sadness. I'm not as good as my sister. She was smart enough to get you to pay for her entire life. I was the fool who actually paid for it. I looked at Sophie. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and humiliation. Her success, the very thing they had just been praising, was a sham, and we all knew it now. My father stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. My mother just looked down at her hands, her whole body seeming to shrink. The trap had been sprung. The truth was out, and the silence that followed was the sound of their world collapsing. The silence that followed my revelation was heavier than any words could ever be. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and warmth out of our corner of the restaurant. My father, a man I had never seen, speechless, opened and closed his mouth like a fish. No sounds coming out. My mother seemed to be trying to physically disappear into the booth's upholstery. It was Sophie who broke first. The carefully constructed facade of the golden child, the successful daughter, crumbled into dust. A choked sob escaped her lips. Then another. Tears began to stream down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. But these weren't the tears of remorse. They were the hot, angry tears of humiliation. "How could you do this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. She wasn't looking at our parents. She was looking at me. "How could you embarrass me like this?" The sheer audacity of her question almost made me laugh. "Embarrass you?" I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "I just spent the last 2 years paying for your life, while you and our parents called me a failure. I think we're a little past embarrassment." "Sophie." My father finally found his voice, though it was weak and reedy, all its usual bluster gone. "Now, Chloe, there's an explanation for this," he stammered, gesturing vaguely at the binder. "We were just trying to even things out. Your sister needed more help than you did." "Even things out?" I shot back, my calm finally cracking. A wave of pure, hot fury washing through me. "You call this evening things out? You lied to me. You stole from me. You made me work 2 jobs and live on scraps so that Sophie could have designer clothes and a new car. You didn't even things out. You took from the child who was sacrificing and gave it to the child who was taking. There is no explanation for that." My mother looked up, her eyes pleading. "We were going to pay you back, honey," she said, her voice barely audible. "No, you weren't," I said, the truth of it landing with cold, hard certainty. "You were never going to tell me. You were just going to keep taking. You were about to ask me to pay for her wedding catering. Was I supposed to fund her honeymoon? 2? A down payment on her first house? Where did it end?" They had no answer. There was nothing they could say to defend the indefensible. They had been caught. Their years of deception laid bare on a restaurant table. The waiter arrived with our food, placing the plates down with a cheerful, "Enjoy your meal." The sight of the food was nauseating. Nobody moved. I knew in that moment that this was the end. There was no coming back from this. The trust was not just broken. It had been methodically dismantled over years of lies. An apology now would be meaningless. Just another manipulation. I gathered my purse and slid out of the booth. I stood over them for a final moment. The 3 people who were supposed to be my family, now looking like strangers. They looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. "I am done," I said, and the words felt like the truest I had ever spoken. "I am done funding your lives. I am done being your secret. I am done being your failure." I took a $100 bill from my wallet and placed it on the table to cover my meal and then some. "The rest is on you," I said, and then I walked away. I didn't look back. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, and I didn't stop. I felt a profound sense of lightness, as if a massive, crushing weight I had been carrying my whole life had suddenly been lifted from my shoulders. The tears that came as I drove home weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of grief for the family I should have had, and most of all, of relief. I was free. The aftermath was exactly what you would expect. The first week brought a flood of voicemails. Angry ones from my father demanding I fix what I broke. Weeping. Manipulative ones from my mother talking about how I was tearing the family apart. Hysterical. Screaming ones from Sophie accusing me of ruining her life. I listened to none of them. I deleted them all. Then the calls stopped. The silence was a balm. I changed my number a month later. News of their collapse came to me in snippets from a cousin I still spoke to occasionally. Without my monthly infusion of cash, their carefully constructed financial house of cards tumbled. They couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments on their own. The house, the one they had accused me of jeopardizing, went into foreclosure 6 months later. They had to downsize to a small rental apartment in a less desirable part of town. Sophie's life imploded as well. Her fiancé, a man who was very much attracted to the lifestyle she led, was less attracted to her once the money dried up. When he found out her entire success was a fabrication funded by her estranged sister, he broke off the engagement. The wedding was canceled. Without my parents, and by extension, my money to prop her up, Sophie had to get a second job. She had to sell her convertible. She had to learn for the first time in her life what it meant to be responsible for herself. I felt no joy in their downfall. It wasn't about revenge. It was simply the natural consequence of their choices. They had built their lives on a foundation of lies and exploitation. And without me to hold it up, it simply fell apart. While their world was shrinking, mine was finally beginning to expand. The year after I walked out of that restaurant was the hardest and most rewarding of my life. I took all the energy I had once poured into my family and invested it in myself. I applied to, and was accepted into, a highly competitive nurse practitioner program in a city 3 states away. Moving was a rebirth. I sold my old, noisy car, packed my few belongings, and didn't look back. My new life was quiet, but it was mine. I lived in a small, clean apartment with a balcony where I grew herbs in little pots. Every piece of furniture, every book on my shelf was something I had chosen and paid for myself. There were no ghosts here. No lingering resentments. It was a blank slate. I excelled in my program. Freed from the constant financial and emotional drain of my family, I could focus completely on my studies. My work in the ICU had given me a foundation of experience that my classmates envied. My professors saw my potential, my dedication. They didn't see a workhorse or someone who was still figuring things out. They saw a skilled, compassionate medical professional. They saw my value. After I graduated, I accepted a position as a nurse practitioner in a cardiology clinic. The work was challenging and fulfilling. I was part of a team that respected me, a team that relied on my judgment. My starting salary was $120,000 a year. The first time I saw that number on my employment contract, I cried. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the validation. It was a number that reflected my skill, my education, and my hard work. It was a number I had earned all on my own. Occasionally, a call would come through from an unknown number. I knew it was them. In the beginning, I would feel a jolt of anxiety, a pang of the old, conditioned guilt. But I never answered. I would just watch the phone ring until it went to voicemail, and then I would delete the message without listening. Their silence, which had wounded me for so many years, was now a boundary I enforced. Their voices had no power over me anymore. I realized that all those years I had been chasing something I was never going to get. I had craved their approval, their validation, their love. I thought that if I just gave more, worked harder, and sacrificed enough, they would finally see me. But the truth is, they never would have. Their family dynamic required a hero and a scapegoat. Sophie was cast as the hero, and I was cast as the failure who funded her success. Nothing I could have done would have ever changed that script. My real failure wasn't my career or my choices. My real failure was believing I needed their approval to feel worthy. Walking away from them was the first time in my life I had chosen myself. It was the first time I had respected myself enough to say, I deserve better than this. I never needed them to be proud of me. I needed to be proud of myself. I never needed their approval. I needed my own respect. And I finally have it. I found my worth not in their validation, but in the quiet confidence of a life I built with my own two hands. My past doesn't define me, but the lessons I learned from it have made me strong. I'm no longer invisible. I finally see myself. If you've ever given everything while being treated like nothing, I see you. Drop your story in the comments below. Hit like if you believe in choosing